Hey, 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 hey. What's happening? What's happening? This is your boy, Ryan Walker. You already know how we get down, man. We're going to do a little special segment today for some HBCU players that don't get talked about that much. But before we get to it, if you're on YouTube, go ahead and push that subscribe button. We got to keep bringing you the highs and the lows and all the dirt, all the great news, all the bad news. You already know, man. We keep it live here on the Birdcage, man. So you already know how we gonna get down. Go ahead and click that subscribe button and get those likes up for us, whatever, so we continue to keep bringing this content for you. So while we get ready to bring you guys in, go ahead and get ready, sit back, and just enjoy a couple of players that we're gonna bring to your attention that the Falcons might have an eye on. Birdcage, let's go. Birdcage. So what's going on, people? You already know what it is, man. This is the HBCU special for the 2023 NFL Draft. My name is Ryan Walker, better known as the historian, man. Do a little something special today. I might not have my whole crew in here, but I'm gonna go ahead and hold it down for you guys and just talk about a couple of players that are literally on the radar and some of the best players in the country that we have out at this point right now. Everybody knew about what went down at Jackson State with a lot of the players that Deion Sanders had. But let's go back and let's look further. We've had three standout players that have come from HBCUs that have been some of the best fixtures in the Falcons organizational history. So, first off, we got to talk about Mr. Claude Humphrey, you know, one of the greatest pass rushers that played in the league. Sadly, it took him forever to get into the NFL Hall of Fame, but at least he got to enjoy it before he passed away. Claude Humphrey came out of Tennessee State and literally was one of the cornerstones for the Grits Blitz defense during those years of the Falcons struggling in the NFL. So when you look at it, HBCUs have always been a foundation for the NFL. And the other player that I'm going to also bring up is one of the best pass catchers we ever had in the history of our organization or whatnot. His records have been long broken. Everything has been long gone, but you got to mention Mr. Alfred Jenkins, Mr. Morris Brown himself. Um, Literally right next door, came over and, he balled his behind off. And Alfred Jenkins was one of the crucial parts of that Falcons air raid arsenal during the 80s. And unfortunately, they lost to the Dallas Cowboys. Another guy who was very instrumental in the Falcons' Grits Blitz defense was a man by the name of Ken Reeves, one of the former safeties in the NFL excuse me, I'm a little tongue twisted today, as you can see, who literally was one of the hitters and one of the smartest ball hawks that we've had in our secondary for years. Mr. Reeves literally helped anchor that defense before Tom Pridemore came along and before Scott Case. He was the Falcon that was patrolling that secondary and literally putting things out there for us to literally just be on par to be one of the best that we've had. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get to it or whatnot. And I'm just going to give you a little bit more history. If you look at majority of the Hall of Famers that are African-American that are in the NFL Hall of Fame at this point now, you look at the fact that they've had multiple to come out of many different HBCUs. You have Jackson State University with Walter Payton, one of the greatest running backs of all time. Jackie Slater played over 20 years in the NFL as an offensive tackle. Durability is key. Lem Barney, one of the first shutdown corners in the NFL, played for the Detroit Lions for some years, came out of Jackson State as well. And also Mr. Robert Dr. Doom Brazil. He came out of Jackson State and he was drafted in that same class as Walter Payton. Jackson State set history in itself when you talk about having two players that were drafted in the first round. Walter Payton was one, Robert Brazile was the second. Ironically, they were best friends, and then they ended up both going to the NFL Hall of Fame. We're not even going to get down to many other places, but you also have Grambling State University, four Hall of Famers there: Charlie Joyner, Willie Brown. You have Willie Davis, great defensive player, and then you also have, last but not least, you got Mr. Willie Brown, one of the best corners that ever played the game. So when you look at it, there have been many institutions that have flooded the NFL with great players at that time. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get to it. We're going to go ahead and jump on the offensive side of the ball first. The first gentleman that I'm going to speak on is a guy that Steve Smith held in high regard, a guy that I've been preaching on for a long time, and I think that he needs his due. It's a gentleman by the name of Xavier Smith. Xavier Smith is one of the best all-around wide receivers, route running, speed, can go across the middle, catch passes, take a hit. He's in a position to where he could be a top draft pick coming out of an HBCU along with his teammate, Isaiah Land, who we're going to get into a little bit later. We're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about Xavier Smith. When you look at it, most of America took notice of Xavier Smith this year, but a lot of us who pay attention to HBCU football as well as regular PWI institutions that play Division I ball, Xavier Smith put his name on the radar for pro scouts when he had a hell of a game against the University of North Carolina Tar Heels. When you look at how he torched that defense, it was really one of the hardest things that you could actually see. And Xavier Smith is a prime example of a guy who didn't really get a chance to even show his skills at the Senior Bowl. He wasn't even invited. Now, he played at the HBCU Legacy Bowl championship or whatnot when they had their Shrine Bowl where they actually had their players. It was only a few players who got to play in the Senior Bowl, the recent Senior Bowl down in Birmingham, Alabama. We're going to get to that a little later. But if you want to look at Xavier Smith's stats, this guy's off the charts. 4.3 speed, literally great hands. If I had to compare him to anybody physically, I would have to say he is a little Steve. He's got a little bit of Steve Smith in him, but has glue for hands. Catches everything that is thrown up his way and is in a position to make things a little bit tough. His season stats for 2022, he had 87 receptions, 1,021 yards, and 11 touchdowns, and he averaged 11 yards a catch. When you have a guy that can play the X, Y, and the Z position, when you're talking about the slot, and the outside positions, he can play all three. You put him anywhere, he's going to be hard to contain, and he's going to be hard to stop. And most defensive backs have had a hard time with stopping this kid in his whole career because he's only reached 1,000 yards twice in his career, of course, and that was his first year was 2019 where he reached it. But his first year that he stepped foot on campus, 48 receptions, 668 yards, averaged 13 yards a catch, 4 touchdowns. His longest touchdown was 39 yards in his freshman season. And as I said before, he's been one of those guys who also has great ball security. He's never fumbled the ball since he's been in college. That's 4 years. You have guys that have fumbleitis in the season, and you have some NFL players who have fumbleitis in the season. So when you look at it, that is one of the toughest things that you can actually do. When you talk about a gentleman like that, he's one of the top players in this draft. Honestly, we're talking about taking a number 2 receiver. This guy could actually come in as a number 2 for us, but he can play the slot as well. So Arthur Smith will be able to plug and play him if we actually used him in a situation to where he could actually make some things happen. So when you look at it overall as a football player, tough, durable, and a guy that really loves the game of football. I just wonder if the Falcons have had people down in Tallahassee taking a look at those boys that's coming off those 7 hills down there in Tallahassee. And shout out to FAMU down Florida A&M, better known as FAMU. So the next prospect that we're actually going to talk about is a man that's after my own heart. Got to talk about Mr. Shaquan Davis. Shaq Davis is a guy who literally is like a baby Megatron. When you talk about how he dominated the game. What put him on the map was the game against Jackson State University in the Celebration Bowl. Pretty much Deion Sanders' first championship, where he got Jackson State on point. But the funny part about it was they forgot that South Carolina State was a football team too. And Shaq Davis had his way with that whole secondary. And two of those guys that are in that secondary are top recruits that we actually have on this list that he just frankly abused. Shaq Davis has done that to everybody during his career. When you look at it, last year, Shaq Davis only had 45 receptions, 934 yards, and 11 touchdowns. He averaged 20 yards a catch. 20 yards a catch. This guy's a deep threat. This guy can run intermediate routes. This guy's a hell of a blocker. When you look at the type of offense that we run, he could be on the opposite side of Drake London. He could also play the slot if you need him to. But the one main thing that is great about his game, he's never fumbled the ball during his career. The best season that he's had was this year, 937 yards. If you look at all of his other seasons that he's played, his freshman year, he only had 31 receptions, 632 yards, averaged 20 yards per catch, gained 20 yards per catch. This is true freshman. 6 touchdowns that year. His sophomore year, 14 receptions, 294 yards, averaged 21 yards a catch, and only had 4 touchdowns. This is the COVID year. So he really didn't have too much time to really establish himself, but that shortened season, for him to put up those type of numbers, that's impressive for a team that's run heavy. The junior season, 38 receptions, 747 yards, and he had 19 yards a catch. But his senior season was his best season all around, almost gaining 1,000 yards, but still averaging over 20 yards a catch. And you're talking about 11 touchdowns. This is a guy who's used to playing in a run-oriented offense. Atlanta, we're a balanced offense. So it wouldn't bother him that he's not getting catches because he comes from a system out of Buddy Pugh's system out of South Carolina State where it is selfless football. And you talk about guys coming into that system being very dangerous at whatever they do because in their minds, they feel as if they can compete on the field with anyone, regardless of them not having some of the facilities or some of the equipment that some of the bigger schools have. And honestly, Shaq Davis is one of the top wide receivers in this country. So that is a guy that you would look at that you could pair as a number 2. And I really feel as if he is someone who I would enjoy to see with the Falcons when you talk about that. The next player that we're going to talk about, he's named after like one of my favorite rappers or whatnot, and his name is Jadakiss Bonds. Jadakiss comes out of Hampton University. Hampton University has always produced solid football players. Hampton is a place where they've had great athletes to come out of that school all the way around. This is just no exception. Jadakiss Bonds, when you look at his season stats this year alone, Jadakiss Bonds had 855 yards alone with 49 receptions, 10 touchdowns, averaged 17 yards a catch. If you want to see someone who will remind you of an Anquan Bolden type receiver, it's Jadakiss Bonds. What we're going to be doing, and on the website, we're going to be posting a lot of these guys' highlights and films so you can actually see what they're like within game action. You can see how they dominate. Even though it's at the HBCU level, there's still NFL talent coming out. Prime example is James Houston, who came out of Jackson State, who played at University of Florida, and literally broke Bubba Baker, who was the Detroit Lions all-time sack leader record. He broke that record this year as a rookie. So when you look at it, there's no shortage of talent. It's just shortage of opportunities. So this is a young man that really could do all the dirty work, catches, isn't a diva, hard-working player. When you look at it, he's only had one season that was just not good, and that was his freshman year in 2018. Now, he had a COVID year, injury year. He came back. He had 7 receptions his first year for 180 yards, averaged 22 yards a catch with 3 touchdowns. But injury happened that year. But after he gets off of the injury side of things, let's talk about what he did in 2019 up until now. 70 receptions, 943 yards, averaged 13 and a half yards a catch with 15 touchdowns, and his longest touchdown was 68 yards. Now, this is a guy who can take it distance even if you give him a screenplay. Another thing he did within the 2021 season, 54 yard. He had 54 receptions, 773 yards, and averaged 14 yards a catch with 6 touchdowns. His longest was 49. When you really look at a wide receiver, these guys are supposed to make the big play, supposed to hold on to the ball. Ball security is key in their life, and making sure that that ball is in their hands so they can make explosive plays with their speed and their skill set to get to the end zone. This is a guy who's bar none a guy who steps onto the field. You know who he is as soon as you see him, not just by the size of him being 6'4", 200 pounds. He's a guy who literally can dominate any good cornerback if you put in front of him because he has no fear and he honestly loves the game. Very, very, very dangerous player when you talk about this young man right here. And it's a blessing that these young men are finally starting to actually be able to get seen by the normal football fans. And now that the NFL is starting to play to actually put back scouts, talent evaluation. Truthfully, I don't think HBCU should have a separate combine as pretty much the NFL. They all need to be in the same combine with the PWI schools and these individuals who are coming out of these big time schools. They shouldn't be excluded from that because at the end of the day, if you've earned the right to be invited to these bowl games, you put in the work, you need to be seen. And truthfully, the NFL needs to stop separating these guys and let them start competing head to head. Because if you ever look back at it, the Senior Bowl, two guys that dominated, totally dominated, Arbery Miller and Isaiah Land in that. But getting back to it, we're going to get back to the offensive side of the ball, ladies and gentlemen. When we talk about running backs, the Falcons are looking for a guy that can have a home run and hit the home run speed. When you talk about running backs, good vision, good cuts, a man by the name of Darius Hagans. Darius Hagans is a guy who he's how can I put it? If I had to describe him as a runner, when you talk about tough, you're talking about physically can get in and out of breaks. He can do some things that most guys really could do at a small size. Darius Hagans is a guy that I actually would even consider for an Arthur Smith type of offense. And when you look at the type of offense that we run, I'm actually pulling up some info on Mr. Darius Hagans and whatnot. I actually know a little bit about the kid, but I want to make sure that I spotlight him perfectly and correctly right off the hand because, Darius Hagans is one of the top tier running backs in this country, but he doesn't get talked about enough because he's coming out of a small school out of Virginia State. So when you look at Darius Hagans, speed, power, hands coming out of the backfield, great receiver, great in pass blocking. He's a guy that you would trust to protect your quarterback. So when you look at Mr. Hagans and whatnot, might not fit the mold of so many others, but he fits the mold of an NFL type prospect. Give me 1 second. I'm actually having some issues with a little bit of my sources. He's 6 foot. He's 6 foot even, 210 pounds. And when you look at his statistical aspects of what he brought to the table, and he also shared carries as well. Darius, let's see. So this year that just went by, Darius had 1,012 yards and 6 touchdowns rushing. His longest touchdown was for 86 yards, and he had 189 attempts. Now, when you look at his receiving, he had 0 touchdowns, but they actually used him into the passing game where he had 17 receptions, where he only had 135 yards. But his explosive speed and being hard to tackle is something that put him in a position to where he could be seen. 6 feet, 6 feet even, 210 pounds. This is a gentleman who can actually fit into Arthur Smith's system. Uh, his 40 time is around 4.445. Solid time for a guy with that size and whatnot. But he actually has very good vision, and that makes him a dangerous runner. He runs to what he sees naturally. So when you have a guy that can run to what he sees naturally, you're going to bring in another guy that's very similar to what we have with, excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, I was about to sneeze. I didn't want to sneeze on the camera in front of you guys, but you got to sit back and look at it when you look at the type of running backs that Arthur Smith has literally used. And we've been in a situation to where we've used big backs with speed. Cordell Patterson, Tyler Algier, Caleb Huntley. He's a Caleb Huntley type of running back. And when you look at how Caleb Huntley was, it was just speed and power. Caleb could take it the distance anytime he touches the ball. Same with this kid, Darius Higgins. He has that same type of burst. We have so many different intangibles when it comes to running backs. If you the best way I can describe a running back is this. Running backs are like snowflakes. You know when it's snowing because it all falls down. But if anybody's ever lived in an area where you've seen snowflakes and you see them up close, they all look the same until, say, you get a couple that fall in your hand. They're cut and they're shaped differently. So what that means is all running backs run in the same plays, but to the human eye, it looks the same. But if you actually are a student of the game or you really pay attention to guys' running styles, everybody is different. Everybody brings something different to the table, and you can see that. Tyler Algier is the type of runner where he doesn't go down on first contact. He's a second effort kind of guy, and he doesn't have breakaway speed, but he has enough speed to get away and to cause havoc. Cordell Patterson is an all-around guy. Touches the ball, makes plays happen, and literally puts his team in a position to win every time he touches the ball. He has a home run. Hopefully those legs can hold up for the second half of the season. Now, the next player that we're going to talk about is in the tight end position, a position that Arthur Smith loves. We got to talk about Kamari Avery out of Bethune-Cookman. Excuse me, Avery out of Bethune-Cookman. From Atlanta, hometown kid. 6'6", 250 pounds, had 40 receptions, 450 yards, 7 touchdowns, averages 11 yards per catch. Now, his best season was not his senior season. His best season was his junior season. He ended up with 51 receptions, 876 yards, 17 yards a catch with 10 touchdowns that he averaged. His longest touchdown was 65 yards. This kid literally has never had anything under 8 yards a catch since he's been in college. And Arthur Smith loves tight ends. This is a guy who he can add to the room as an undrafted free agent, or maybe a lower 7th round pick, or maybe an 8th round pick if we have that. You can bring him in and actually put him in a position to where he can help this tight end room because he brings something else to the table. He reminds you of a Michael Pruitt who we had this year, who was actually showing out for the Falcons this year. This kid literally is someone that I honestly would bring in. And he's, from what we're starting to see now with the Falcons, they're actually bringing in guys who are hometown kids. They're starting to bring in guys that are from the state of Georgia. And they're starting to bring, they're trying to really have a hometown feel so people can actually start rooting for the team if you weren't a true Falcon fan, but especially the hometown crowd, because it's way too many hometown fans that are here in Atlanta that are not Falcon fans. We have so many replants and transplants. Most of your Falcon fans live outside of Atlanta or they live around the country. But we need to have more of a heavy presence of Falcon fans right there in the city. Too many out-of-towners, or as my man Strap would say, too many sellouts. Now, gotta rush through, gotta get through a guy by the name of Mr. Dion Golet Jr. out of Bowie State University. He's a quarterback. This is a guy who's a project quarterback, but he has all the intangibles in the world to be a very good prospect. He's 6'3", 225 pounds, out of Largo, Maryland. He threw for, so just to get back to it or whatnot, his college career. Let's talk about what he threw for this year. He actually threw for, excuse me. All right, here we go. So for the 2022 season or whatnot, the most yards that he had in the game this year, he had 439 yards against Livingstone College. You know, his longest pass play for this year was 80 yards. And you know, if you look at him and you look at his completion percentage or whatnot, he's within the 60s, high 50s or whatnot. Something that needs to be tweaked and something that needs to be worked on. But if you look at it, he completed 207 passes out of 337 passes with 8 interceptions. He had 2,649 yards. And he also had, as we said, he had 18 touchdowns this year. You have to remember, Bowie State is a run-heavy type of offense. So for him to put those numbers up in a run type of offense, run-oriented offense, that puts him in a category of being a project quarterback or even a backup. But possibly he shows flashes of being a guy who could actually be a starter if he needed to. But looking at his college stats, he's being looked at, but he's not going to be highly touted. He's going to be a guy that's going to have to work his way up, strap up his boots, bring his lunch box to work, and he's going to have to come show it. Now, one of the guys that I would like for the Falcons to bring in, offensive lineman Mark Evans II. This kid, durable, available at all times. For an offensive lineman, he plays offensive tackle and he also plays guard. This is a kid who has good footwork, very strong at the point of attack, has a nasty, mean streak in him. If I had to compare him to somebody, I would have to say he would be an Art Shell type of offensive lineman. Or if I'm going to go modern day offensive lineman, I would have to say he would remind me of a young. I say he had to remind me of a young Bruce Matthews because he's very versatile and very nimble for a big man. And he comes to work every day and he doesn't miss. This is a guy that could possibly come in and even start for the Falcons. And I think he would be perfect for us. That's just my opinion on that gentleman. Now we're going to go ahead and switch over to the defense side of the ball. First off, let's talk about Andrew Farmer. Andrew Farmer led all HBCUs in sacks this year. All HBCUs. The young man is out of Lane College, out of Jackson, Tennessee. 6'3", 250 pounds. He ran a 4.740. So for him, they rotated him not just as an offensive line. I'm sorry, as a defensive edge rusher. They also had him playing interior as well. So when you look at it, Andrew, he's originally from Jacksonville, Florida. So he's a kid that's out of Jacksonville, hot football background. And when you look at the way that he led his team in tackles this year as well. So it wasn't much that got past the kid. He has a quick first step, comes to work with a bad attitude, and you can rotate him. He's a guy that will remind you of a Fred Dean, or even I would even say let's go back to it with our Falcons or whatnot. He will remind you of a big Chuck Smith. He's one of those type of players where he has that type of value, but you don't see it because he comes out of a smaller school. Now, speaking of a guy that has a lot of value, Mr. Isaiah Land. Isaiah Land, hands down, is the best outside linebacker coming out of the HBCU draft this year. No ifs, ands, or questions about it. Showed out in the Senior Bowl, was a gentleman who literally was putting hats on everybody every time he could in the Senior Bowl, and led the defense in tackles. He and Aubrey Miller, who I'm going to talk about next. But this is a guy that was recruited by Nick Saban, Kirby Smart at Georgia, and then Ryan Day at Ohio State. This kid had everybody in the country that wanted him, but he chose to go to a HBCU because he wanted to make his own mark, which he did. And now he could possibly be a day 2, day 3 draft pick. instead of being a guy that's unknown, he literally has put himself out there. And when you talk about a guy that comes off the ball with an attitude, he's a guy who can also drop into coverage and run with the running back because of the speed. He's a home state kid in Georgia, but he's originally from Buffalo, New York. He moved to Georgia when his mother got a better job and a better situation. And once he moved to Georgia, out in Lawrenceville, he became one of the best football players in the state on the defensive side of the ball. He also played offense too. Now, I mentioned his partner in crime, Mr. Aubrey Miller. Aubrey Miller led the Jackson State Tigers in tackles this year, middle linebacker, took over for Keontae Hampton. Keontae Hampton was a guy that should have been drafted to the NFL, but he ended up going over to the USFL playing for a bit. But Aubrey Miller is a kid that you have to look out for. Aubrey is somebody who comes off the edge with a bad attitude. If he plays on the edge, he plays in the middle. And what separates him is he's very smart. He came out of Missouri and transferred into Jackson State and became one of the best players in the SWAC conference for the past 2.5 years, 2.5, 3 years. He was there playing for Coach Deion Sanders, Coach Prime, as everybody knows. Now, getting on down to one of his teammates, Mr. Isaiah Bolden. Isaiah Bolden was another guy who was a JUCO transfer who was supposed to go to University of Georgia. However, he changed his mind at the last time and became one of the top cornerbacks out of the HBCU world. And he also brought value as a kick returner and also as a punt returner as well. Kind of mimicking his old coach Deion Sanders, but he's not on that level yet. But the kid was the number one JUCO player coming out, and everybody wanted him, but Coach Prime was able to land him. Honestly, with the few guys that I've given you so far, these are guys that can make a difference. I'm going to post a lot of their footage, and I'm going to make sure that we actually have their information out there for you. So if you got any questions, concerns, I'm a DM away, or if I'm not in the DM, you can check me out in Dirty Bird's lair, or you can check me out in the Falcon's nest or whatnot. And we definitely are going to chop it up over these players and many others that we've been doing mock drafts and putting stuff out. I just wanted to get on for a quick minute, holler at you guys, let you guys know that, hey, PWIs aren't the only schools that we're looking at. We're looking at HBCUs as well as D2 schools. Because here's my thing. If you can draft Troy Anderson out of Montana State and you're willing to use him make him a project because of his intangibles, start going to these HBCUs and start drafting these kids who actually are not project players. They are players who can actually help when it comes to making an impact from day one. You got guys that have been playing these positions their whole life. So let's go ahead and cut the foolishness, the bouffale, as I say in Creole. Shout out to my Haitians out there. Let's just go ahead and start bringing guys in that's going to help us win. And it doesn't matter where a guy comes from, but we need to start bringing these kids back from HBCUs into the league and at least giving them a shot, because there are so many of these guys that can play on Sundays. And some of these guys that go to HBCUs because it's either grades, certain situations financially, and certain things that they can't handle, and they have to find another way to play. Just like any other kid that has to go to a D2 school or even a junior college or whatnot just to have an opportunity. Stop overlooking these kids coming out of these smaller schools. Start giving these kids a look, because some of these kids that are out here can be franchise players. But with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and call it. This is your boy, Ryan Walker. We are going to be with you guys on Thursday night. You already know what it is, man. Thursday at 8, we're going to talk about the draft, chop it up. We might have a little something special for you. But go ahead and keep us out here, and still hit that subscribe button if you're on YouTube. Please hit the subscribe and the like buttons, man. We definitely appreciate it. And for those that are on Facebook, slide over to YouTube. It costs nothing but a quick second. Hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. We definitely will have some treats for you coming up during the draft or whatnot. My name is Ryan Walker, better known as the Historian. You already know how I get down, man. I love you guys, and I will see you guys coming up this week. Y'all be blessed and y'all be easy.